begins his own session. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so just give me a sec. Let me share the deck so we can go ahead and start right away. But thanks to everyone who has joined in so far. For the committee leads that are here, please remind folks in your respective committee groups to join us so that we can have a very robust conversation. Okay, so before Dr. Taya comes on, just to give a bit of background and context to Dr. Taya and a few others who might not, I see a few like new names on the list who might not have joined any of our sessions before. This is just to give you some bit of context as to what the Rivers 2050 Vision Project is all about. The project is designed in 5 stages. Um, so far, we're at stage 4, but stage 2 and 3 are ongoing. Um, the the modus operandi for us as policy shapers is often to work on all of these projects with a task force, which are often made up of young people. And as you know, our organization's vision is to mainstream youth in public policy development in Nigeria, whether it's conversations or ideation or stuff like that. So we started the project out by establishing a task force. Over 100 young people have been able to join the task force. And this was a very important stage because, I mean, post the book being launched, it's be this task force that would be working together with community residents and river citizens to basically hold the government accountable, right? So that was quite key, and we're really happy that we're able to start out with that stage. We've also launched a statewide survey, which is currently ongoing. I'll speak a bit more about that shortly. But the goal is to be able to see how we can mainstream directly the wishes and thoughts of Rivers residents, Rivers people into the vision book. And we've also launched a series of like focus group discussions and key informant interviews with expert panels, with today being one of them. And these conversations have been open for people to be able to join from all over the world. So Rivers people within the States and those in diaspora as well have been joining the conversations. So all of the information we get from the survey and the FGDs and the KIIs will all go into the Rivers 2050 Vision Book, which is already being worked on already. The Vision Book team is working very hard in putting together all the preliminary chapters of the book so that once we're done with the survey and the data from the FGD and KIIs will easily just go into the other chapters. What is quite key for us is not just to get this book done, but to ensure that we can get the state government to adopt it and develop a plan based on this vision. And so that's why stage 5 is quite key. Sometime next year, we hope that the vision book will be launched and we'll be able to engage the government, state leaders, whether it's former, current state leaders, and advocate for the various needs that we see in the respective communities to be part of the agenda, whether it's the 2027 election agenda or the agendas that would come up after that time, but to ensure that the needs are basically kept like front and center in all of the conversations that are going on within the states. Through the project, we're experimenting a new visioning model. As you know, the visioning model often is usually led by government, where governments would initiate a vision, work closely with a civil society partner or private sector partner, or folks like the NESG, and then that vision book then gets informed as part of the policy documents for the state. So we're saying, what if you turn the triangle on its head and you have citizens instead initiate the vision, and it becomes more like a citizen manifesto. And then we hope that citizens can then advocate for what their needs are based on that vision book, and then working closely with NGOs and civil society to hold government accountable to the things that they want to see, which is what democracy should be about. So that's the model we're experimenting with, and let's see how the model goes. Just a few of for those who might have missed conversations we've had so far, focus group discussions. We had an official from the Qatar Foundation speak to us about how the Qatari government has been able to design their national vision for 2030, which was launched in 2008, and how education is quite paramount in how they are transiting from a hydrocarbon economy to a knowledge-based economy. Last Saturday, we spoke to the Commissioner for Health, had a key informant interview on healthcare in 2050. We've had FGD on music and entertainment, and we're going to have for so many other sectors in August as well. So all of this information is on YouTube. For those who might have missed it, Policy Shapers, at Policy Shapers on YouTube, you'll find all the videos and conversations in there. And the statewide survey, like I said, will continue to run until early next year. The goal is that we want to see how we can get as many citizens as possible to input their dreams and ideas and stories as well into this survey. So if you go to our website, rivers2050.org, you'll find out more information about the survey there. And we've been testing out how technology can be used for visioning. So we've been using like artificial intelligence tools to design scenarios and create visual features that also become a form of advocacy, right? To challenge our imagination as to what, the River State of 2050 should be looking like, and sort of like, marry that to what our present situation is. And this has always been a very good conversation starter for us. So all of this info again is on the website if you want to see more about some of the visual features that we've created. So yeah, so like I said, everything comes together within the book, and we hope that this will become a model for how young people can engage in public policy, especially as it relates to visioning and planning. And also hope that Rivers State being a very politically charged state, we hope that this sort of like centers the conversation around what is most important, which is the people and which is development, much more than the politics. Okay, so for today's conversation, 3 key questions that we're hoping that we'll be able to answer, and Dr. Taya is aware of them. I'm sure he has a lot more to share with us today. I'm really excited about this. One of the questions is, how can Rivers State be one of the windows of commerce for Nigeria? When Nigeria first found oil in the 1950s in Oloibiri, Port Harcourt was actually the port where oil was taken out from. When coal was found in Enugu back in the colonial era and through World War I, Port Harcourt was the port where coal was taken out of Nigeria from. So how can Rivers State continue to be that window of commerce for the country? And how can we also like play a role in combating food insecurity? Because with currently less than 2% of our arable land being used for agriculture, there's a huge potential for agriculture that we're not really amassing. Despite being Rivers State, we import fish and some ridiculous things like that. So we think that there's so much in agriculture that we can leverage. So that's the kind of questions that we also have as well. And also, I think one of the most important questions, and I'm sure Dr. Tai would also give us some bit of insight into this, is how can we ensure continuity in governance, especially when it comes to executing long-term visions? Because Rivers State has really suffered from a lack of continuity across party divides and administration divides. So how do we ensure, and how can we ensure that for the Rivers 2050 vision, we can have some bit of consistency despite the 4-year cycle that we often have in our government? Okay, so I'll just introduce Dr. Taya now and then I hand over to him because I'm sure he has a lot to share with us today. This is a very abridged version of Dr. Taya's bio. For those of us who are in the NESG, we know that Dr. Taya is a very well-read man and it's really inspiring to most of us who plan to work in the public policy space or are working in the public policy space currently. He's the CEO of the NESG, that's the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He's a distinguished scholar, practitioner, economist, policy entrepreneur, and strategist. He has contributed significantly to various reform initiatives spanning several sectors like aviation, agriculture, finance, governance, maritime, public service, things like the OGP as well, co-chairing the adoption of the OGP in Nigeria as well. He has an illustrious academic background as an alumnus of the Federal University of Technology, Akure, University of Oxford, MIT, Harvard Kennedy School, Walden University, and so many more, to mention a few. He's a fellow of several esteemed professional institutions, including the Chief of Staff Association, the Institute of Strategic Management in Nigeria, and the Institute of Management Consultants in the US. He's really passionate about how he can enable young people to contribute to public policy. Has seen through like several initiatives, whether it's the NESG Bridge Fellowship, which Stephen, Oyi, and some of us have been beneficiaries of these projects and, has upskilled us to be able to deliver and work in our various roles. And I'm sure that he's also really happy to also be getting this chance to share with us. I also want to thank Dr. Taya because when we launched, our policy shapers launched um, our policy hackathon in 2021, he took us really seriously, and he came to speak at our policy hackathon event as the first keynote speaker. And I think because of that, everybody else took us seriously. After that year, all of the hackathons we've done, all the guests we've had, have taken us seriously because Dr. Taya actually came to share with us. So thank you so much, sir, for always being available whenever we reach out to you. And I will hand over the mic to you now and give you permission to speak so that you can take it away. Okay, so yeah, and others, you notice as well that you can't unmute because we're just trying to handle the tech to ensure that there are no interruptions while people are speaking. So when we come to the question and answer section, you would be able to speak at that point. So let me know, Dr. T, once you get the request to unmute. I've sent you the request now.
Thanks a million. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm having one of those device adjustment issues. So can you unmute both of my accounts so I can use one to present and one to
Okay.
and my phone to speak?
Okay.
My laptop is not the mic adaptation is refusing to shift on time. So just unmute and kind of give me permissions on both accounts connected.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Ebenezer. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I take you seriously. I think it's important that, in my mind, that the younger generation takes itself seriously, whether or not it seems as if leaders take us seriously. I think that's it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we take ourselves seriously, others will do the same. I think it's also crucial to own the moment, as it were. So my father, who became a member of the Supreme Military Ruling Council at 29, used to say to me when I was 25 that we are ruling the country at your age. And so when people say, wait your turn now, I say, no, thanks. The fact is that if you're not leading your nation in your 20s and your 30s, you will not be leading your nation in your 40s and your 50s, and so on and so forth. Leadership is a calling, and it's not age bound. And so my upfront challenge to all of you is not to wait. View today as your leadership call, view your entire life as a calling to compose a life of national leadership. Take it seriously, take yourselves seriously, and your generation will take you seriously, and after a while, none of you will be able to be ignored by anyone from any demographic. And that's the way to think about where we go from here. This is a difficult presentation because I was between spending my time on what you might know well and what might be useful for the visioning process. So Rivers is a very unique state in that Rivers has always participated in any version of Nigeria's economic transformation. And I think Ebenezer pointed that out. In the first round of capital formation in Nigeria under the colonial rule, basically Rivers played a big role, in being a port of both a port of call and a port of export. As Nigeria shifted to the First Republic, rivers played a big role in, again, driving and contributing to, port competitiveness, linear competitiveness, and of course, oil production itself. Rivers is easily 30% of GDP, especially because of the combined power of just oil and gas production, national income. So it's a significant state, but it's a significant state that is riddled with its own political, inconsistencies. And I think Ebenezer pointed to that. I think a good place to start, and there's therefore for me is with the basic idea of visioning, right? And I want to thank everyone for the town hall series, for taking Rivers 2050 seriously, and I hope other youths in other states will begin to envision their states for themselves and stop waiting for somebody to tell them what the vision of their state is. I think that's a very important thing to do, to create the future to live in the future of your dreams. You have to create the future. You can't simply wait for the future to happen to you. And I think that's what this process is, and that's what makes it powerful. So some big ideas is first that vision matters, right? That nations that and peoples that don't have a clear vision are breaking the first law of nations, right? A nation exists only if it can identify itself by who it is, or who the collective people of the nation are, or the values they stand for, and the future they want to build together. So an essential component of nation building is the concept of where are we going together, right? The clearer that picture is, the likelihood that the cohesiveness of that nation will hold, and the cohesiveness of those people will hold, is stronger. In fact, there is a scripture that says, where there's no vision, the people perish. I think it's in the good book, it's in Proverbs. And so vision itself is an element of national progress and national development and nation building. It's used to rally nations together. It's used to shift generations, and it's used to shape generational change. In 1949, a generation of Chinese declared 1848 to 1949 a century of shame. Just imagine. A whole generation thought of 100 years before them, looked at what had happened to their country, and declared it a century of shame and of humiliation. And that reflection on the century of shame became the basis for Chinese pragmatism. They asked themselves, what will we do in the next 100 years that will be different from what our predecessors did in the last 100 years? The result was a 100-year agenda for China. By the way, that 100-year agenda, China just celebrated in 2021, I think, actually 2024, the milestone of finishing the first 50 years of their 100-year plan. In other words, the 100-year plan that they envisioned, they set in 1949, right? They've executed 50 years of it already, and are now in the next second 50-year part of their 100-year vision. And according to the Chinese, they are on track to fulfill their national vision. So vision gives the tool for transgenerational change. When a vision is done properly, it explores, the threats, what you call your SWOT analysis, the threats, the opportunities, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, and the possibilities that can be pursued by people. And they normally lead to a set of audacious goals. And those audacious goals, of course, can become impetus for a state, in this case, Rivers, or a country, Nigeria, planning to deliver specific plans, programs that ultimately translate into outputs, outcomes, impacts that deliver the vision of the people. What has happened to date is that visioning has been left only to, the institutions. When you ask the average Nigerian, what is the Nigerian dream, or what is the Rivers dream, right? You will likely get, you'll likely get no coherent answer. And that's something that must change, because aspirations for the future is the beginning of really giving national strategic planning the impetus it requires. So vision matters, and visions happen. And visions are usually carried by young people. So the generation of Chinese leaders that now lead China were basically in their teens, right, and early 20s, in 1949. If you think of the transformation that China has been through, it took that generation to birth it, and many of them now, have exited the stage or have retired, in their 90s, 100, as the case may be. But in one generation decided to go in a different direction. They built the capacity to go in that direction. And now another generation of Chinese are enjoying that transformation, that massive transformation that has happened. Another example of young people dreaming is, most of the Southeast Asia countries. If you think of Singapore, when we think of Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore, we think of the old man, the old wise man Lee Kuan Yew. But Lee Kuan Yew, as a 20-year-old student in Cambridge, was sitting around with his colleagues and, and discussing how to go back and radically change, the Malay nation and the Singaporean extraction. And of course, when the Malays kicked the Singaporeans out, his opportunity came, and they were young men. But they were young men with a vision. So it's important also, and I think that's my last point on this slide, it's important to have audacious visions when you're young, because if those visions mobilize a generation, then transgenerational change is possible. Okay, so the thinking behind visions matter, because they kind of drive how we plan nations. In the case of Nigeria, where we are trying to plan this Vision 2050, the planning for most of us has been borrowed. The way we think of planning in Nigeria has been borrowed, and that has significant concerns by itself. So when you look at Nigerian development planning system, it comes from a mixture of influences. UK, EU legacy has an incremental input into our planning. OECD influences on country best practices. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we borrowed Malaysian models in terms of pair benchmarking. So the Vision 2010 and Vision 2020 were built on the back of the Malaysian Vision 2020, 2050 documents, as the case may be. So Nigeria's planning system has kind of been based on these other ideas. However, whilst we have planned or copied these processes for planning, we have never really achieved real success in terms of planning execution and vision execution in Nigeria. From Europe, we borrowed this idea that planning should be multi-layered, and should be tied to the region. So till today, when Nigeria plans, it aligns its plans to ECOWAS, to African Union, etc. And then, of course, if you look at the EU, it also has what you call a local level plan. Now, the challenge is that we've seen very little down up input into the planning process in Nigeria. When we plan, those of you that were part of the planning process for 2021 to 2025, we did a lot of checking what AU was doing, what ECOWAS was doing, but we didn't do enough of visioning from what the people are doing at the local level. So we borrow some of these models, but don't fully integrate and execute them, as a country, and that kind of creates its own issues. Okay. Then, in terms of OECD influence in terms of our planning process, we tend to coordinate government around something we call the National Development Plan. But the inputs of those plans, especially the part that comes from citizens, tends to be very, very low. And this is something that I think that this project is trying to solve for, which is really increase the capacity of citizens to provide input, right, into the planning process beyond, the ministry, departments, agencies of government, as the case may be. But this OECD model dominated our Vision 2010 plan, for example. And it's something to think about as you think of this Vision 2050 plan for the River State. When you look at the Malaysian influence on our planning process, so Vision 2010, Vision 2020, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2021 were influenced by this planning process. And basically, again, it's basically a central planning process where what happens is that you have a National Development Planning Committee, and it coordinates taking input through circulars and consultations from private sector, government, ministries, departments, and agencies up into a planning unit that translates into the plan itself, then the drafts of the plan that are finally approved by the Executive Council, and then finally signed into law. This ability to sign visions and plans into law is one of the reasons why the Malaysia 2020 worked, right? Nigeria's plans are not legislated, and so there's a big risk that once a new person comes into power, who was not part of the planning process, the person could derail the overall plan by just, basically short-circuiting the planning process and starting afresh. So in Nigeria, planning ends with the approval of cabinet. It doesn't go to parliament to legislate the plan. The Malaysians legislate their plan, and this kind of protects the plan from the arbitrariness of politicians and the political process. This might be something that, as you think of Rivers 2050, you want to really think about how do we depoliticize the plan. If all political parties, all parts of society are contributing to the plan, then no matter the political party in office, right, the plan should hold, right? It's not a plan for a political party. So the question is, how do you elevate the visioning process and the planning process above political parties? How do you legislate it? So whatever political party is in power, the plan is binding on that political party or those political actors to execute the plan. This is one of the ways to de-risk that arbitrariness of political somersaults, especially in derailing plans, as the case may be. Now, when you also look at the Malaysian implementation framework, you see that there is a clear linkage between national planning and state planning. This is something that the only time we achieved this in Nigeria was with the NEEDS, the National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy under President Obasanjo. You had the NEEDS, you had the State Economic Empowerment Development Strategy, the SEEDS, and then you had the Local Economic and Development Strategy, the LEADS. This was the only time in the last, 30 years where there was a single alignment between national, state, and local plans. This is so important because in the case of rivers, right? As you build the vision down up, you should have, local contributions to the visions and local contributions to the development agenda. It should feed up to the state, and then the state plan should align at some point with the vision and the planning of the national. This alignment guarantees that you have what you call planning coherence, but it also guarantees that the allocation of resources towards the priorities are the same and that everyone is on the same page in terms of what you call common shared agendas. Sometimes there's a link between local government areas where their common shared agendas is different from the state and where the state is different from the country. Now, there are no two states in Nigeria that are the same. So you have to find your unique DNA as a state, and what will be similar with national and what will be completely different from national. Okay. And I think that that's what creates the state planning process. That's your level 2, and your level 2 and 3 has to be integrated. This is so much more important now that there is the big conversation about local government autonomy. With local government having greater fiscal autonomy, will come the need to translate visioning into the state development plan, but the state development plan into local plans, so that you're not just giving resources to local governments. The resources to local governments are aligned to local development plans. And those local development plans are aligned to state visioning and agendas. And by executing a local development plan, each local government area is then contributing to the visioning for the state and the performance of the state. Now, in a perfect world, and we are far from a perfect world, in a perfect world, what should be happening at the bottom in a planning and visioning process is that you should have civil society stimulating a process of circulars and proposals, right? This is the visioning, the thinking that drives the vision for the country, the vision for the state should be happening. And that process of stimulating society should be contributing to the shaping of agendas at a local level. Okay. That process should lead in the state to the creation of what you call common state and local agendas. So within Rivers, for example, the process of just consultation should be able to tell us that what is coming across as shared and common agendas are in these 5 or 6 buckets. And these are the priorities for the Rivers people. And this is the vision for the Rivers people. And this is what is shared across board. It is those seculars that form state and local common agendas that become the basis for state development planning. And the same thing, common agendas at the state shared with national become part of the national development planning process. This process is not working well in Nigeria today. That's my extreme right, from local government, state, national to National Economic Council. It's a very broken process, and something that the NESG and other advocates continue to advocate for. So, but remember, this is for planning the whole country, right? And rivers will now be a subset under state governments and local governments. So at the minimum, a vision for Rivers State has to at least take a lighthouse view of where Nigeria will be and where rivers will be within Nigeria in 2050. And that then leads to visioning out the role rivers will play in that Nigeria 2050. Many people think, including I, that rivers should emerge, as both a mega city or mega cities, that are exponentially as big or bigger than Lagos, right? How you deliver that then requires a whole new level of thinking. For example, let's say that's the vision. But I hope you get the idea of this slide. The country plans at a national level, but the input into that plan should come from local. Today, there's very little local that goes into our visioning process. A little here and there from the enlightened elite, but in general, bottom-up approaches tend to be very, very narrow. I think we have someone that needs to mute, if they could help. That I think is key. Now, when you begin to look at where a country can go, right? Where a country can go in terms of 2050, the first thing to think about is one, what are the scenarios? So let's begin with box number 1 to your left. Some of the questions you want to answer at the beginning of the process is scenario planning. What are the options for rivers to grow, rivers to become significant, right? What will the review of the current visioning process be? What's rivers' economic performance? Are there any existing plans and policies to look at? Are there any constraints in laws or legislation that hinder rivers from going where it needs to go? Then you need to then agree on strategic pillars. What will be the pillars of the vision, right? And then you need to build some consultative process. So this is a consultative process among the young people, but I think when the book is ready, the book will now be the basis to do another consultative process between the youth, federal, subnational, private sector, civil society, religious, traditional rulers, etc. It's that consensus building that creates the basis for what will be planned for, what will now go into an actual plan. And this is where your vision book goes into the planning process, of government to now drive some specific plans. And then, of course, you then have setting some planning maturity milestones. How often will you check in on the plan? If you're, for example, you're doing a plan from now to a vision from now to 2050, that's likely going to be broken into 5 or 10-year plans, right? So how do you check on where rivers is? 2030 check, 2040 check, 2050 check, or in five years. That's something to kind of think about. Now, when you look at a visioning framework, of course, like I said at the beginning, it has to be bold and audacious, but it has to be grounded in the context, the reality. So what we've done over the years, and some of you that have worked with us have seen this slide before, is this is an assumption of how far Nigeria will grow. But the question is what will be the growth in rivers in terms of rivers demographic? What's the current growth rate? Where's it gonna go? How many young people is rivers going to be catering for by 2050? If Nigeria is catering for 10 million people, what are the implications of that population in terms of social amenities, infrastructure, land, water, jobs, human capital? Those then become things to think about. So visioning has to be grounded in some of the analytics, and I like the point that Ebenezer made and that you guys already executed in terms of the visualization. But beyond the visualization, make sure you're solid on the data, right? Especially the data that anchors the realities for you, because it's a very different thing to plan infrastructure for 200 million people and to plan infrastructure for 400 million people. So your visioning should have that groundedness in the data that allows you to then define what are the factors you're visioning around, and therefore what are the constraints to your vision that must be overcome in the planning process. Another part of the visioning process is to look at what happens externally around the world. So you have fourth industrial revolution technologies, you have climate change, you have innovations in different types of technology, that make the world a very different world. Rivers has been built largely around the extraction and the development of oil and gas. Is that the future, or is the future radically different? The next thing to think about is projections in terms of, to achieve your vision, what will economic growth look like? What will shifts in the key sectors look like? What are the dominant sectors in rivers today? How will they change? What is unemployment today? How do you want that to change? So some scenario modeling around key economic indices, poverty rate, what is it today? How will that change? Life expectancy, and if so, social and economic conditions have to be part of the visioning template. You want to put a set of assumptions on the vision that allow you to not just visualize, but to visualize using the data. The last thing is to create a statement of the future that all rivers youth can rally around. So this was a statement created in 2020, I think, when we're doing the vision 2021 to 2025. We had asked leaders to define where Nigeria would be by 2050, and this was how they defined it. So you want to have at the end not just a visual statement, but a text statement that encapsulates the rivers of our dreams in 2050. The next big part of thinking about visioning is then what pathways can you take to the vision? I mean, once the vision statement is clear, once the visualization is solid, you want to begin to think about, okay, how do we move towards that vision? And what pathways do we take to growth and to economic complexity? Nigeria generally is a very low complexity country. In other words, we do not produce many complex products. We import practically most of the things we consume. We produce very little. That's changing now. But as you think of the pathway for rivers into the future, you want to define how it will grow. There are many areas where rivers could gain competitive advantage. So in my presentation, I've left you a list of products that rivers can compete in. Actually, there are 50 products in Nigeria that can compete in. My look at the 50 products, at least 30 of these products that rivers can become globally competitive in. And so the question really, when you think about your future, is can we diversify rivers, especially from oil and gas, to some of the other areas where rivers can be globally competitive? It's important to note that a subnational economy can be globally competitive by itself outside a country. Within a country, can own its space as a globally competitive subnational economy in the world. And that's something that we kind of need to think about. Okay. The second thing to think about is what the role rivers will play in terms of connecting, so what I call corridor management. Most subnational economies cannot exist by itself. You have to be able to connect. And I think Ebenezer pointed that rivers has played the role of being the hub, right? The export hub for the South for years. Now, with many new seaport projects in the South, will that be the future? And if it were the future, what will keep it so, right? Something to think about. Then there's also looking at the direction of regional investments in the South and where it's going. I think rivers will remain a strong oil and gas hub because of the future investments are already on their way, because of offshore fiscals, etc. But the question is, what other areas will you compete in? And how do you build really deep structural reforms for competitiveness and the ease of doing business that attract more investments to Rivers State? A big idea when we think about Nigeria as a whole, and this is something that we keep saying to stakeholders, is that when we discuss Nigeria's competitiveness will come from subnational competitive advantage development. And so it is state-level actions that drive product complexity development based on factor and demand conditions in a particular state that makes a state competitive. So I want to recommend some additional surveys, some new ways to think about getting rivers ready for whatever the vision is we set. Is one, what are the factor and demand conditions and know-hows that you can assemble at the level of Rivers State? In other words, what products can you be ready to produce that the world will consume? I have a theory that there is no state in Nigeria that cannot export a non-oil product to the tune of $1 billion a year. So if Rivers was to envision, being a key exporter of a non-oil product or products, which categories will those products be, right? And it has to do it in an area where it has comparative advantage. Once you've targeted what those products are, then it is the acceleration process that needs to happen, which is then ensuring that from a visioning process, from a rescaling process, from an industrial policy process, you're building the state capacity to be able to leapfrog into those areas. So, for example, I know that a few years ago, Rivers was producing more bananas and plantain than any other single geographical area in West Africa. I don't know what's happened to it today. I hear that it's not the case again. And then of course you need the right policy support to get that going. So there are a couple of questions you want to answer, and of course we can answer them on this call. But you have to ask, as you think of the visioning for Rivers 2050, it's almost an economic inventory, right? What industries, does your location give competitive advantage? Okay. And how do you ensure that that is something you look at? What are the natural resources, and the natural endowments in Rivers State? What are the quantities of those endowments? What are the economic values? What are the rules that govern their exploitation? So there are some deeper questions that you have to answer in giving the vision meat and how. What competencies must the people of Rivers have to be able to fully take advantage of their factor endowments and factor conditions? right? What's the size of the skilled labor in Rivers State, and how would industries benefit from those skills? So, I'll leave some of these slides with you. They need to be kind of part of how you think of commerce, trade, and industrial policy in Rivers State, especially from a visioning point of view, right? So that the vision is anchored in some of the, like I said, the factor condition realities. The next is Rivers has had some back and forth. You industrialize and then you deindustrialize, right? Driven by some factors that, some are political, some are social, some are economic. How do you define what your supporting and related industries will be in Rivers State? And how do you build economic clusters? What if 2 or 3 economic clusters need to evolve in Rivers, what would they be? I know there was an agro-allied industrial base that I know there was a logistics cluster that Rivers was building. I know, of course, you have an oil and gas cluster. What else, right? What type of economic activity can you concentrate in Rivers that gives you geographical concentration of firms that allows you to complete the value chain, to create complex products that gives you strategic advantage to provide product portfolio to the global market that is competitive, okay? And then, of course, there's the hard work of coordinating political and economic institutions to do their work, making sure they're efficient, working with government to create the right economic policies, making sure that the budgets are spent on modern and enabling infrastructure, and making sure that you're building the right human capital in terms of right high quality education, affordable healthcare, peace and safety in the environment that then guarantees that the coordination that pulls Rivers as a subnational superpower, in Nigeria and in West Africa emerges. So in conclusion, Rivers State Vision 2050, is welcome. You are onto a big idea that is transformative and will have transgenerational impact and change. It needs to be anchored in the vision needs to be anchored in the data and the context. You want to give it a strong economic ambition that is backed by a deeper knowledge of how to help Rivers achieve the strategic leap it needs. And the best generation to do this thinking is the generation that is here on this call. And it's just thank you for listening. And I'm sure when we go into question and answer sessions, we can jump into any of the detail you want. So thank you everyone for listening. And I hope this has been useful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. T. This is very useful information. The reactions in the chats, people talking in the WhatsApp group and everywhere, just shows how very useful this is. Thanks a lot for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So I'll hand over to Wisdom now to coordinate the question and answer section. Everyone now has a part on mute. So once Wisdom calls you, please feel free to unmute. So what's your Wisdom?
Right. Confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Dr. Tayo, thank you so much. In fact, you just, our entire mindset of how we have been thinking about what we have been doing, it just took us to another level altogether. But I have a question before I open, the mic to others to begin to ask really. And now my question is around, the nation, so with Nigeria not having a clear visioning path, currently, especially towards 2050, as we are thinking now, how does that affect what we're doing, and how do we align Rivers Vision 2050? Because it's looking like we can plan as a state, but if the nation itself is not giving us a direction to where it's heading, it might be a big issue at some point. So the question is, with Nigeria not having a clear visioning path currently as a country, how would that affect our own visioning that we're thinking for our state as young people? And what can we do to mitigate this, as we go?
So I think you're dealing with two things, right? And they are not the same. Nigeria does have a 2050 visioning document. That's not the challenge. The challenge is Nigeria is not following its vision. So if you look at the chat, I have just dropped you a link to something called the Nigeria Agenda 2050. So there's a document, right? So I hope you understand, Wisdom. There is actually a document called Agenda 2050. It exists. It's clear. It's written there. Okay, you can look at the document. So it's there. But no one, I mean, other than you guys, I've not heard anybody discuss 2050 in a long time. Okay, so you guys now have an opportunity to take the Agenda 2050 and operationalize it for Rivers State. That's what should have happened across the country, but it didn't. So you guys have that opportunity to do that now. You're doing the right thing with this document, but only you guys are doing it.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Thank you, Doug. So everyone, by raising your hands, you can ask questions. So I'm looking at the chat. Okay, Comfort. You can ask your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tayo, for this session. It's quite enlightening. I felt like I was in Harvard. I was in the Harvard leadership class. So my question is about the need, the seed, and the lead, because I remember clearly I was in the university during my undergraduate, and I was living with an uncle who was part of the seed. I read that document. At that state level, I also had the opportunity to, lay my hands on the need. It was really interesting. It had a lot. I was hopeful for the country, but right now, like you rightly pointed out, it is not operationalized. So at this point where policy shapers have decided to, drive the process or go back to that journey, not necessarily go back, like we are rather creating a pathway for Rivers State. What would you advise going forward now that we have collectively gained this insight, much insight from you? Do you advise that we should go back and pick even the seed, not just the national economic development plan, but the state level one that has been existing? But again, even if we're going to pick them up and look at it, the society is evolving. There are lots more opportunities. I mean, I know that, especially looking at the commercial angle and comparative products for comparative advantage and possibility of export, I see the opportunity there. And I'm just wondering if creating this document or would actually guarantee operationalization. What do we do to ensure that we mitigate the risks of having the state not adopting, or even if they adopting is one thing, operationalizing and implementation is another thing? Should we go back and advocate for the, maybe, I don't know. I'm just confused because it feels like, okay, this session has kept us where I personally feel like, we need to reflect deeply and look at what is existing and see how we can marry them together and then move forward from there. Thank you.
So that's a great question. But here's what I think. The only use of the seeds Rivers Seeds document, which is 2023 to 2027, is learning the structure of the rivers economy today, right? And the structure of the Nigerian economy today is worlds apart from where it was in 2003, right? In 2003, we had not even implemented digital transformation in Nigeria. There was no GSM revolution, you know? So you can imagine how that document looks like and where we are today. In 2003, we couldn't have been on this call having a Zoom meeting, okay? So the possibilities, you know, of digital transformation, the emergence of the services sector, you know, the era of the fourth industrial revolution, you know, and the other attendant opportunities means that your process today is legitimate, right? So you can use the past to learn, but you're here now, and everything has to be about the future. And if you remember, the needs document was basically Nigeria's strategy for poverty reduction, right? It was built to specifically reduce poverty and drive about development at all levels. So there's a lot of lessons there. So I would advise you look at the Rivers seeds and leads documents and see what you can gain. But I can tell you that when you look at those documents, some things will have changed, some things will not have changed. Okay, so so for example, I can assure you that you know, your GDP per capita would have changed. You know, I can assure you that you know, your GDP size will have changed. You know, Rivers has the second largest GDP in Nigeria. I would assure you that your dominant sectors will have changed. You know, today, Rivers is not just a maritime hub. Rivers is you know, is a petrochemical superpower in Nigeria, and Rivers has a strong, vibrant agriculture sector. So, you know, plantain, palm oil, cassava, and then Rivers has a big services sector. You know, Rivers, you know, IGR has grown exponentially between 2003 to date, right? In 2023, Rivers, you know, derived almost 60.4% of its total revenue allocation. You know, through the federation account, but has very strong oil, non-oil revenue base. So there's a lot about Rivers that is uniquely different today than it was before. You know, a state that can fund its budget with 40% of its IGR is significant. You know, you have a larger GDP per capita than most states in Nigeria. So to be honest, use the past to learn, but where Rivers is today is a unique opportunity. But Rivers has also dealt in the last 2 decades with an interesting set of challenges in peace and security, right? And that could point to demographic changes and value changes that need to be addressed in a new visioning document. So I think that you're doing the right thing. So learn from the past, but steady the course. What you're doing matters.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Any other question? We don't want your question too long, please, because we really need to wrap up now. It's past 4 already. But are there any other questions? Okay. Why no other questions? Dr. Tayo, just to ask you, now we don't legislate these national plans at the end of the day. So maybe that's why nobody is operationalizing it, or that's why each government come and take a new direction. From your experience, has there been any reason why maybe we will never end up legislating through all of these plans that we put together?
Well, you know, what I will say is the speakership of the state houses of assembly gets younger by the year. The average age of a speaker of the State House of Assembly means that most houses of assembly are led by the youth. Okay, so I should ask you young people, why haven't you legislated it? Okay, so for me, I think the question is the other way around, right? If there is a visioning document ready, you guys should call the House of Reps guys into a meeting, present it to them, and say to them, go and legislate our Rivers 2050, right? So for me, it's the other way around. We are hoping. Look, there are two types of philosophy to constitutional democracies. In terms of the reforms to constitutional democracy, there's one school of thought that says if the constitutional democracy is not working, simply, break it down and then start afresh, right? Then there's another school of thought that says push the constitutional democracy to its limits, and when it reaches its limits, citizens should jump into the fray and force the amendment of the Constitution, right? The legal framework we have as a country is created by humans, right? It's us that write laws. Is people that come from our communities that become House of Reps, state House of Representatives, members of the state houses of assembly and federal House of Representatives, etc. So for me, the change will happen when we start to engage our colleagues, right? 75% of the federal House of Representatives are young people. So what are we talking about? Let's call a conference of young lawmakers and say, come on, you won't have our votes as young people in Nigeria if we can't see you commit to the future, right? And force the conversation. So I think again, it's the other way around. The young people need to put on the agenda the items they want their lawmakers to vote on. My guess is that any sensible politician, if 80% of young people want something, will back it, right? I don't even think the politicians will give it a second thought. So if your visioning document gains the popularity, gains the acceptance of most of the Rivers youth at home and in diaspora, I can't see how they're going to tell you guys no. So do the work, which is why I think you're doing the right thing. Do the work, get a blueprint out, take it around, get all the young people on board, and everybody will pay attention to it. And these guys, politicians, you remember that, the word politician comes from politis. It means people, right? A politician's first calibration for what to point to is people. If people are behind something, a politician, even if he disagrees, begins to listen. Because the very essence of his base, his power, is drawn from the power of the people. And even if it's a captive political system where the power is not drawn from the people, he fears the people. Because the power of revolutions to reset political order sits with the people also. So I think that there's a lot of unused social capital.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Tayo. Over to you, Ebenezer. No other question, as you can see.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Wisdom. Dr. Tayo, we don't want to keep you longer, but thanks a lot for the time you spent with us. We don't take it for granted. This is really useful conversation. We will continue to lean on the wisdom and expertise within the NESG as we go through the process, even before the book is published. We'll, of course, share this for your inputs as much as your time permits. And we'll definitely be in touch to also keep you posted as we go across the project as well. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks to everyone who participated. We also had the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Youth here all through from the beginning, Dr. Roma Akeji. Thank you so much, Ma, for being part of this and for being part of this entire project. We will definitely, of course, have inputs from the Ministry of Youth when the engagement time comes, but we're very happy. Whenever we see you, we get encouraged as well. That's, like the Ministry of Youth is also part of this and supporting us. So thank you so much for for your time. Thanks, everyone. For those who are in the task force, we're going to meet next week, Sunday. So thanks, everyone, for your time. See you next week. And this conversation will be shared on YouTube as well so that you can listen at your spare time. All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.
And regards to Soybe and baby.
Thanks. They'll hear. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.